On December 17, 1997, thousands of people gathered in the cold hills of eastern Kentucky to watch 7 elk step out of transport trailers. Wild elk had been gone from the state for more than a century. The animals arriving that day came from western herds, and no one knew how well they would adapt to this wetter, more forested part of Appalachia. But those 7 elk were only the beginning. Over the next 5 years, Kentucky released 1,541 animals. Today, the state supports a wild herd estimated at around 10,000, the largest free-ranging elk population east of the Rocky Mountains. And the strangest part is where they succeeded. Not in untouched wilderness, across a landscape scarred by coal mining. The elk did not simply survive the former mines. Those damaged lands helped make their return possible. Elk once ranged across much of North America, including Kentucky. But during the 19th century, unregulated hunting and land conversion destroyed the original eastern populations. By the late 1800s, the eastern elk had been eliminated. A century later, eastern Kentucky was facing a different kind of disappearance. For generations, the region had depended on coal. Mining created jobs, towns, and transport networks. But as employment declined, communities were left with fewer opportunities and large areas of disturbed land. Surface mining had transformed entire ridges. Trees and soil were removed, rock was blasted apart, and coal was extracted from beneath the mountains. After mining, companies were required to stabilize the ground. Many sites were reshaped, covered with soil, and planted with fast-growing grasses and legumes. This did not recreate an Appalachian forest. Some sites remained compacted, simplified, and ecologically damaged. But the process produced something unusual in a heavily wooded region, large areas of open grassland. To most people, these places looked like industrial leftovers. To wildlife biologists, they looked like opportunity. Elk do not depend on one habitat alone. Open areas provide grasses, clover, flowers, and other nutritious plants. Forest edges provide browse, acorns, and shade. Deeper woodland offers shelter from heat, wind, and human disturbance. Cows can also hide young calves in quieter cover. Eastern Kentucky offered all of these elements close together. The reclaimed mines formed broad feeding grounds, while the surrounding forested slopes provided cover. Roads and intensive agriculture were relatively limited in much of the restoration zone, giving a large animal room to move between seasonal habitats. The mines had created the openings. The forests completed the habitat. Ecologists call these open, recently disturbed areas early successional habitat. They are temporary by nature, but while they remain open, they can produce dense, nutritious vegetation at ground level. Exactly the kind of food a large grazing animal can exploit. In the 1990s, biologists began asking whether elk from western populations could fill the ecological space left empty more than a century earlier. Earlier eastern restoration attempts had often involved too few animals, limited habitat, or weak long-term support. Kentucky decided to try something larger. Elk were captured from healthy populations across 6 western states. Moving them was not simple. Adult elk can weigh several hundred kilograms, and every animal had to be handled without serious injury. They were examined, tested for disease, and fitted with tracking collars. Some were held temporarily before transport. Then they were loaded onto trucks for journeys of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers. The releases were spread from 1997 to 2002, allowing managers to move large numbers while maintaining health checks and monitoring each new group. Then the managers stepped back and watched. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The herd grew far faster than expected. The founding population was unusually large for a restoration project and came from several different source herds, helping preserve genetic diversity. The environment also worked in their favor. Winters were generally milder than in the Rocky Mountains. Reclaimed grasslands supplied abundant food. Forests offered shelter. And Kentucky had no established populations of wolves or mountain lions capable of regulating the herd. Healthy females can produce a calf almost every year. With good nutrition and relatively low predation, more calves survived and more females entered the breeding population. Small groups became larger herds. Radio collars, aerial surveys, and field observations tracked their expansion. Elk moved between feeding grounds, forest cover, water, and quieter valleys. Their use of dense woodland also made them increasingly difficult to count precisely. Eventually, the population spread across a restoration zone covering 4.1 million acres and 16 counties. Within little more than a decade, Kentucky had built the largest free-ranging elk herd east of the Rocky Mountains. But the elk changed more than wildlife numbers. In 2001, Kentucky opened its first regulated elk hunt. At first, only a handful of permits were issued. As the herd grew, hunting became an important management tool in a landscape without large natural predators. Hunters traveled from across the country, staying in motels, hiring guides, and spending money in local restaurants and shops. A 2022 state survey estimated elk-related economic activity at more than $3 million. Then came the wildlife watchers. Families, photographers, and tourists began driving into former coal country to see animals as large as horses standing in the mist at dawn, or to hear bulls calling across the hills during the autumn rut. Places once associated almost entirely with extraction and decline began to acquire a second identity: wildlife habitat, hunting ground, and destination for nature tourism. The elk did not replace the coal economy. A few $1 million could never match the scale of the industry that shaped the region. But the animals gave some former mining land a new ecological and economic purpose. The success eventually moved beyond Kentucky. A state that had received elk from the West became a donor itself. Kentucky later supplied animals to restoration programs in Missouri and Virginia, while its experience influenced other projects across the eastern United States. That reversal mattered. It showed that the herd was no longer a fragile experiment. It had become large enough to support restoration elsewhere, while providing managers with practical knowledge about transport, disease testing, habitat use, and population control. But this is not a simple story of nature repairing itself. The same minelands that helped the herd grow are now changing again. Grasslands do not remain open forever. Shrubs invade. Young trees appear. Over time, the land begins returning to forest. At the same time, declining surface mining means fewer new open areas are being created. For many species, recovering forest is positive. But for elk, the loss of open feeding habitat can reduce the very landscape mosaic that made the restoration so successful. Managers now use prescribed fire, mowing, and mechanical clearing to slow that transition in selected areas. Hunting is used to keep the herd within the capacity of the land. Biologists also monitor disease, including chronic wasting disease, a fatal neurological illness affecting deer and elk. There are conflicts too. Elk cross roads, damage fences, and sometimes feed near homes or small farms. A successful reintroduction does not remove management decisions. It creates new ones. The program succeeded, and success created a permanent responsibility. Kentucky's coal mines did not restore the ecosystem. They left behind a disturbed landscape with one unexpected feature: open feeding grounds inside one of the largest forested regions in the eastern United States. Biologists recognized that opportunity. They brought in a large founding population, protected it, monitored it, and managed the habitat around it. Those first 7 elk disappeared into the trees on a cold December afternoon in 1997. Today, thousands of their descendants move through the same hills, crossing grasslands created by industry and the forested slopes surrounding them. The land was damaged, it was not dead, and the return of the elk showed that even an industrial landscape can support something large, wild, and alive. If people understand what the land has become, rather than only what it used to be,